Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The new Secretary General, who happens to be looking down upon us from the back of the room, started off his vision statement with, "We the peoples." And of course, he was drawing upon the UN Charter when he did so. And I wish to echo that vision by welcoming you to UN House, because this is your UN House. In addition, I also wish to welcome you to the first session of what will be the monthly Bhutan Dialogues. In terms of the Bhutan Dialogues, I am mindful of two key wisdoms. The first from Gandhiji. Whenever you are in doubt, apply the following test. Recall the face of the poorest and the weakest man whom you may have seen, and ask yourself if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to him. Will he gain anything by it? Will it restore him to control over his own life and destiny? And the second wisdom is from the Secretary General, Gutierrez, who said, "In the end, it comes down to values. We want the world our children inherit to be defined by the values enshrined in the UN Charter, those being peace, justice, respect, human rights, tolerance, and solidarity." So how does all this relate to the Bhutan Dialogues? I believe when a group of people with this wisdom come together, much is possible. So, Loden Foundation and the UN have joined together to provide a learning and networking hub for development practitioners in Bhutan. This is a space where we come together to discuss issues, learn from each other, and build connections. This will allow the development sector to become stronger in Bhutan, and as Gandhi would say, strengthen the poorest and weakest man whom you may have seen. I am hoping, if Gandhiji is looking down upon us, that he would have included women in this quote, were he here today in 2017. In addition to collaborating with the Loden Foundation on Bhutan Dialogues, we are also launching our new website today with a section specifically dedicated to Bhutan Dialogues. In this section of our website, you can find a number of useful resources, including a compilation of development-related publications on Bhutan, and free learning and training opportunities from leading universities. To make the compilation of development resources as accurate and comprehensive as possible, we would be most grateful if you could share with us your resources. After all, we are in this together. We are organising a series of fundraising workshops over the coming months, information which is about to go up on the website. These we are offering to the development sector free of cost. I cite this as a specific example of the networking opportunities we wish to highlight through the Bhutan Dialogues network. For our first session of Bhutan Dialogues, we are joined by our host, Dr. Karma Funso of the Loden Foundation, and our first guest, Dasho Kinley Dorji. I have never played cards in Bhutan, but I assume, as we see in the West, you should always start with a good ace. Dasho Kinley, as well, has been working in media for over 3 decades, earning a Master's of Science in Journalism from Columbia University. Dasho Kinley started Council and served as Secretary of the Ministry of Information and Communications, and currently is the editor of the Druk Journal, a publication which focuses on creating conversations around Bhutanese policy issues. He's also the author of a collection of short stories within the realm of happiness. Dr. Karma Funso is the host of Bhutan Dialogues, and as we were preparing for this Bhutan Dialogues, I realised how fortunate we were about 6 or 8 weeks when probably you also read him write in the Council that he essentially believed that the Buddha was a management guru. Dr. Karma is a renowned Buddhist scholar and has spent well over a decade as a monk. He is the first Bhutanese to receive a D.Phil from Oxford, where he focused on Buddhist studies. He's also the founder of the Loden Foundation, which works to improve Bhutanese society through initiatives in education, learning, entrepreneurship among Bhutanese children and young adults. Allow me to close with 2 points. Great thanks to all who did the background work, including Sima, Rinchen, Yeshi, Tendel, Kezan, Ugan and Liam. And of course, very immediately after this event, we are having an opportunity to share a cup of tea and a cup of coffee, and of course we would be grateful and happy if you could join us in that hospitality. With that, Dr. Karma, over to you yourself and Dasho.
Dasho, welcome to the first session of Bhutan Dialogues. This is the opening of the space for civil and critical conversations that we have planned. And you yourself be engaged in creating such space for critical discourse and dialogue. It is so appropriate that you are our first guest. And in this space, I would like to invite you, us, to carry out a deep, meaningful conversation, to practice as much as we can mindful listening and mindful right speech, to challenge our assumptions, ask hard questions of our time, and through that, at best, maybe inspire some people, and at least provoke lots of people to think about things and join us to shape our future. Dasho, you are truly a doyen of journalism and media in Bhutan. Your CV is probably something that most journalists, any journalist in Bhutan would envy to have. I remember you telling me that journalism is not a job from 9 to 5, but it's rather a calling. So Dasho, first question, how did you find your calling? How did you encounter your career?
Okay, thanks, Doctor. I'm very intimidated, sitting next to must confess. Anyway, I don't know about inspiration and all that, but I can guarantee some confusion at the end of this conversation. So, to answer your question, what I believe, what I've always believed, is that we actually don't often make decisions on what happens to us eventually. I think it's kind of karmic responsibilities depending on where you're born, when, what the situation is, and you kind of fall into place. And we're talking about media and journalism, and I went to study journalism. I didn't know what it was. I happened to, the priority then was trying to get out of the army, not to get put into the army, because that was the priority then. And so there was a course called engineering, electronic engineering, which I did, but that fell through. And then, because I liked writing, I eventually got scholarships to go and study journalism. And that's when I learned that journalism is a calling, not a job. It's a responsibility in any society. And I think that's what, when I discuss with Bhutanese journalists or so-called journalists, this is what keeps coming up.
So, journalism as a responsibility, you said. You have lived through most of the history of development of media and journalism in Bhutan. And in one of your articles about media then and now, you reminisce quite a lot about how media grew in Bhutan by leaps and bounds, in fact, and you are part of that growth. What is your opinion on the current situation of current status of media in Bhutan? Are our media houses and journalists bearing that responsibility effectively?
This is getting quite deep early on in the when we began, I would say in the late 70s, early 80s, and when we expanded a government bulletin into the first newspaper, then the conversation or the terminology was development journalism. That this is a developing country and this is what journalism reflects. And development then meant roads and bridges and schools, hospitals. Then over the years we went through the other era, like information age, digital age. This the terminology keeps changing, but media, I think, grew with Bhutanese society, Bhutan, and the polity. And then, of course, now if you talk about media now or journalism now, I think we're going through this amazing political transformation. And to be honest, what do I think of media now? Well, like many of us, media is also, I think, a little bit lost. And because the demands are much more now. Because now with political transformation, with elections, with new discourse, with new words and concepts like democracy, I think media is struggling. I think what happened was that when democratic governance was introduced in Bhutan, there was a lot of excitement. A lot of young people saying, "Oh, we want to be journalists," and they looked around and they saw media around the place, like India being the nearest, quite confrontational and quite loud, aggressive in some ways. Then I think we've reached a stage where we're kind of sitting back and trying to clarify our confusion. We can go into that.
Well, for me to hear the paragon of journalism in Bhutan to say the media is lost is unsettling. Media plays a very important role in development, in informing the society, in helping us become conscious and conscientious citizens, in bringing out issues of corruption, in evaluating the development works. So, has our media in the past contributed effectively to that kind of development process? Have the media houses stretched their boundaries, let's say, to get media in the most effective, most instrumental position?
I think yes. I think we have Bhutan has changed. The society has changed a lot in our short lifetime. Media have played very important roles there in stretching the boundaries of speech. I mean, there were many things which were sensitive earlier, which we discuss now. My own experience, democracy. I mean, I didn't dare use the word democracy because many of our senior leadership thought that anti-monarchy, and politics. Bhutanese, I know young Bhutanese at one stage were told not to study politics. It's not for us, and maybe that's one of the reasons we are as confused as we are. When I say lost, I think what I mean is that in this transition taking place now, I think all of us are trying to figure out our roles. The politicians, bureaucrats, to an extent, I would say even our monarchy, which is now playing a different role, people, and media, obviously. And in terms of what the media need to do now, what we expect of the media, and we can't blame them. This is media still in their infancy. So I think this is part of this path that we have to go through.
We were talking about media after almost 60 years, because it was established sometime in 1960, and still to call it in the still infancy. Does it take so long to mature as media? It should have come about now of age to address serious issues and deal with hard challenges.
I think it's going to take much longer. I think in many countries around the world today, media is actually going the other way, media that were quite mature, quite credible, are now seem to be going backwards. In our case, yes, because it's, I mean, what is news? What is society? I mean, and because of this kind of really dramatic changes that are taking place, it's the professionalism, I would say. Media is not about technology, it's not about money, it's not about a lot of things, it's about professionalism. Professionals. Professionalism comes with professionals, I think, and this is what we are. I think it happens in many countries and societies that, you know, people who study journalism are quite open, have, you know, good exposure, and then move on quickly to other places. After a few interviews, they make their network contacts and move on. I mean, that seems to also happen in many societies. But yes, I think we are yet to really understand the responsibility of journalism, you know, of taking society forward, of, in fact, in a developing country, of educating the audience and the population.
So, what remains the main hurdles, Dasho, from your point of view, in taking media further and in making them instruments of public education, in making them contribute towards development work in a better form?
No, as you're saying, I think education and training, basically, and exposure. It'll come with time, and like in so many other fields, I think government has a big role here in Bhutan by creating the environment and the conditions through policy, regulatory environment. And when you say regulatory environment, we don't mean the tough regulations that we sometimes see. We mean an environment that encourages openness. You know, if freedom of speech is guaranteed in the Constitution, along with freedom of media, which many countries don't have, and freedom of expression. So it's a question of, that's there, the Constitution is guaranteeing that. So it's, what do we do with this? With this freedom of expression, which actually should really be a basic human right.
So you're saying that the legal instruments for media and journalism exist in Bhutan. It's mainly the human capacity aspect. But you also have this problem of a lot of senior journalists leaving media houses, not purely for economic reasons. A lot of them leaving because they don't have the freedom of expression they wish to have. Does the legal instruments really accommodate their concerns, their issues as well? Sometimes the legal frameworks seem to work theoretically, but in practice there are other factors that influence real life decisions.
Yeah. I think it will. Those are there, and those are there in every society, I think. Once the Constitution, the mother of all laws, guarantees freedom of expression, I mean, that's there. You know, that we have the Constitution of the Kingdom of Bhutan. But again, like you're saying, yes, reality can be different sometimes. You know, the pressures. I think there may be two issues here when you talk about media and some of the senior, which we read about in our media, some of the senior journalists leaving. I think one is pressure. You know, we are, I think most of us would agree, if you really think about it, honestly, that we are currently a divided society. Divided along political lines, you know, divided not in ideology, but parties. When the multi-party system has been introduced, we know there's been divisions in our communities along family lines. You know, sometimes, as they say, if an election is not held on ideology, it becomes a beauty contest. It becomes a clash of personalities. So, along with that is also the sense that if you're not with us, you're against us. That's that kind of thinking. I think it's because we are politically naive, we are yet to mature. So, if a government would, the opposition blames government and blames bureaucrats, it's happened here, to be on the other side. You were working with that government, you know, so you must be on their side. I think there's a fair bit of that thinking. And then the pressures. Journalists, editors have come under pressure, have left, but at the same time there's the other draw, I think, because most of the newspapers, for example, can't even afford to pay their people on time, and being a consultant now is fairly lucrative, I think. There are a lot of people coming out of college as consultants. I don't know how that happens, but I thought to be a consultant you needed some experience, at least you needed to write clearly, and you needed to know what you're doing, but now you can start your career as a consultant. So, a lot of attractions, and then other agencies that...
So Dasho, you are saying our media is in its infancy, and then we have some consultants who never had any proper training. Now, I again remember you telling me that media is a reflection of society. Now, if our media state is truly reflecting the status of Bhutan society, are we, even in terms of social, economic, political development, in our infancy? For instance, if we talk about space like this, there is perhaps a greater need for such deliberations, discussions to inform plans and policies effectively. But at the moment, there is a serious dearth of such space. So, in our development discourse, we think we gain linked to media, have a lot of work to do in creating such forums for creative, critical thinking.
I think so, and I think so. Like, for example, an initiative like this is aimed at that. We've reached a stage where we've recognized the need for this. We started this Druk journal because we thought we needed better, more in-depth discourse on issues that mattered, issues of importance today, because we're not getting that. So I think that element is happening. We are in infancy in many ways, politics included. I don't want to sound condescending, but there's someone who said that Bhutanese people need to learn how to think, critical thinking, and I would agree. We all do. I think need to learn to an extent, because the way I see it, we live in a hierarchical society. You don't necessarily challenge the senior or big shot, etc. So you don't question. Okay. Our school system doesn't teach young people to question. Students don't question the teachers. So we have this. I think that this sensitivity, timidity, and I think that's what we need. But I think that's natural, normal in a society at this stage of change. So I think this is why such discourse is so critical, so important. I think.
So if this kind of space and forum is going to contribute towards decision making, for instance, the Druk journal did an issue, the last issue on sustainability. Do you know of any impact that issue has had on sustainable thinking and sustainable policies?
Rather than the last issue, yes, in the sense that this year is the first, just 1 year of SDGs, and most of us don't know what SDGs are. Some people didn't even get to know the MDGs, and now we are in the SDGs. So I don't think even the planners, government planners, are very clear about that. So in that sense, yes, we need this background, we need this discussion. But more than the last issue, I would say that now we are doing the 6th issue now, and we're getting good feedback. We find that we've got some feedback from people here saying that Druk Journal is the most substantive source of information in many areas. Because each issue we go into a theme, we have a theme, and we have about 17, 18 articles from different approaches on that theme, so we get that depth. We know that, for example, even the Sherapsi, they're picking up some of these articles to teach in their curriculum and all. So that is, I think that is coming, but I think we still need to work at it.
Yes. So going further now with this forum, with Druk Journal and many similar space for critical thinking, one of the challenges that journalists in general and particularly you for your career seem to face is this small society mentality. That you practiced a great deal of self-censorship, you told me the other day, because we live in a small society. Now, if you are to be really speaking the truth, asking hard questions, we need to transcend that. How to go about overcoming this small society mentality and self-censorship?
Okay. So, first of all, yes, we do live in a small society. We not only know each other, but we are all perhaps related to each other. we've had problems. Someone described my work, someone who knows me well, as a balancing act. You know, and in many ways it has been. Okay, it was balanced between, say, when you talk about journalism, I get, say, government control and the lowest common denominator. You know, the sensationalism, the materialism, and consumerism that media around the world is promoting. So it is that balancing act, and I would say most governments also do tend to try to muzzle media and to suit them, within politics. So yes. What was the second half of the question?
How do we go forward to overcome this small society mindset?
Media literacy. I think media and information literacy is critical, not just for media, but for everyone. And now when we talk about media, we're not just talking about mainstream, we're talking about social media, a very, very powerful force. You know? And that's where we really need to be good human beings. The policies and guidelines that are coming out, people are writing for the use of social media, is basically guidelines to being a good human being.
So, Dasho, you led on to the next point that I think we should discuss, and that is a very important issue, the issue of social media, of IT technology, of citizenship journalism. Now, we are inundated, we are overwhelmed with the information we receive through social media. Everyone can be a journalist. And in many ways, I think, that you have somebody taking the raw footage of an incident that the viewer can see and pass his or her own judgment and interpret his or her own way. In many ways, that contributes to having a very objective understanding of the real situation. But then we also are confronted now with fake news, with alternative truths. So journalists today have to face this challenge of keeping the attention and the interest of the audience, of the public, within the mainstream media and not being hijacked by social media. How can one go about that? How should one deal with this issue of social media and frenzy?
I have a problem with this term citizen journalist, which has caught on around the world. I think citizens are more into gossip and rumor and even hate speech than journalism. This did happen when, I think in the Western societies, citizens were saying now, we don't need you journalists, we don't need someone to decide what I'm going to watch or read or listen to. I'm going to do it myself. I have a million people in my audience I have reach, access to. And then that really scared the media community, actually. When they went through a lot of tension and nervousness. And then I think the realization came that 99.9% almost of the content on internet is rubbish. And it's like we have the same, we have the same sensitivities here, same nervousness, because the beginning, what do you see on social media? Quite a lot of personal attacks, hate speech. So that was a trend. But now I think we've reached another cycle where the social media is so pervasive that you're seeing post-truth. The truth doesn't seem to matter, because there's no chance to check facts now. When it's so pervasive, as the term I think is that the court of public opinion, when the views, when perspectives are out there, the facts and truth become less important, because it's the general impression that takes over. And I think that's also happening here. There's something which we need to watch out. But the long-term solution, if we talk about a solution, is education.
I'm going to come back to the post-truth issue later on. But Dasho, you seem to be quite pessimistic about social media and the IT benefits that we can reap. In many ways, it seems that IT advancement and social media instruments have created or have given the equality to millions of citizens, that children in the middle of nowhere in Africa or in the middle of nowhere here in Bhutan can access from their smartphone or from their computer and have information readily available. And that empowers them really. And if we were to only trust mainstream media, most mainstream media, especially here in Bhutan, are based on subsidies, on subscriptions, and as a result, I think as you again said in one of your papers, that going for subsidy is really trading your independence. They are not necessarily impartial voices. So, in that respect, perhaps social media gives us a much more impartial access to information and news than mainstream media. What's your take?
Agreed, agreed. I think ICT is wonderful. In fact, that's my background. It's a wonderful tool, and that's what we need to keep in mind, that it's a tool. It's actually not about, ICT is not about technology, it's about people. It's about how you do things. If you think of ICT as technology, you do the wrong things more efficiently. And we're doing that in many cases. I think I'm not worried so much about ICT. I'm a little bit nervous about what we are doing with ICT, that we are not catching up. We do have, for example, we do have social media policy, and from that some guidelines. But not many people seem to know that. So we're not, I think ICT we have to use. I mean, that's the reality today. It's such a powerful tool for governance, for commerce, for everything, and for socializing, for society, keeping societies, social structures together. I think ICT is really the answer. In Bhutan, we always said that our biggest challenge is the rugged terrain, communication, and here is the answer in every sense. But we seem to be a little slow at picking it up. ICT, for example, in most countries, they have to use ICT, social media, Facebook and everything for governance. Here, I don't know the exact situation now, but we banned Facebook in government offices. When I met my Singapore counterpart, and I said, we've stopped Facebook, he got the shock of his life. Over there, they have to use Facebook to reach out to people, for interactive governance. So I was thinking, well, he said, why? So here the concern is that, many civil servants will go on Facebook, personal, chatting all day, etc., not working. He's saying they have the luxury to do that. He said, in Singapore, if you waste time chatting on social media, you'll be till 12 in office till 12 finishing your work. So it's a different work culture. I think it's that's what we have to keep in mind.
Facebook here in Bhutan is only accessible to the literate population, and that is its main disadvantage, it seems, vis-a-vis WeChat, for instance. And WeChat in recent times seems to have become the main instrument for socialization, for forming civic groups. In fact, I think in the informal civil society sector, there is far more work done through WeChat groups, raising funds for religious causes or doing social work. So these ICT tools seem to be contributing a lot in terms of civic development, in terms of civil society organizations.
Of course, WeChat, exchange on WeChat is probably very quickly documented in Beijing or somewhere. But anyway, yes, I think the written forms of social media are more familiar to the educated, so-called educated people. But I think it doesn't stop there. My own experience in my own house, last winter when I was traveling outside, asked my mother, 79-year-old nun, who's never been out anywhere, what she wanted. I thought she would want a Uniqlo jacket, but she wanted a thumb drive, and I got the shock of my life. She didn't know what to call it, but she's the little thing So I found out that all her practice teachings, my son has been, a college-going son, has been giving her, and she has access to, with social media, the original teachings of all the masters, down the ages. And then she realized, worked it out that if you drop the phone somewhere, it broke, she lose all these teachings. So how do you save it? So she asked my son, and he said, put in a thumb drive. So she wanted a thumb drive. So, I mean, when you need it, that's why I think you use for culture, for spiritual practice, for cultural exchanges, I think, and then WeChat being a sound, technology, voice technology. I think that's why it's picking up so fast in the rural areas.
So with the ICT and social media tools becoming more and more popular across the world, not only here in Bhutan, what is the future of mainstream media that especially rely heavily on its very huge human resource machinery, which relies also on print runs? And each time I read The Guardian, almost all the articles at the end you find a financial appeal because it cannot sustain. And Guardian, with hundreds and thousands of its subscribers, if it faces that problem, how would the newspapers, the television and radio stations here face the future? We have a very small pool of subscribers, very small commercials industry. So do they have a future?
I think I understand your question at two levels. One is the sustainability issue of media, and that was my nightmare when I was, in a way, when I was communication information secretary, because the market here is so small. We don't need it cannot support 12 newspapers, 6 radio stations, 2 television stations, all that. We don't. And if you look at the audience, we don't need 11 newspapers. In fact, many of the newspapers were actually pretending. I mean, they were missing issues. Some of them were not even selling. They were just getting trying to get ad revenue. So actually, I was saying my sleepless nights, because I drafted a guideline. Was the one thing, whether fortunately or unfortunately, the government is the largest advertiser in Bhutan. Government has the largest purse there. And we drafted guidelines on how government should behave like a professional advertiser and give ads to newspapers and radio that reach the people, that have credible, good content, that avoid sensationalism. And some of these things you can with their standard rules. Advertising is a very, very sophisticated culture everywhere. So we can just follow those. Government also has the rules on how government should advertise. Not go to give it to your cousins and friends and all that, but follow certain guidelines. We lost out in that because it's a very interesting but not surprising trend. Because when the media, our media, especially private media, heard of that, they actually went to the politicians, the leadership, saying, "Oh, in a democracy and information, the bureaucrats are getting tough, and they're going to stop giving us ads, and we're going to die, and there will be no democracy." And I think the politicians saw an opportunity to keep these reporters happy, and they said, "Oh no, we must help all the small, we must help small newspapers." So I suddenly realized that politicians and media were, forming a nexus behind my back, so to speak. This is something which happens, expected, but that's one. The other question is that media, because of the problems of distribution, etc., has to go online. Now journalists have to go online. There's no choice. And in fact, there's this whole big debate in the U.S. The U.S. driving the free press, that when the New York Times stops its hard copy and goes online, I mean, that's it. And these things do happen.
So in addition to the problems, we also see, obviously, a serious lack of expertise in the media. That it's not just the media, in fact, we expand it to the whole country. We have a serious problem of people not having the culture to listen properly, to read, and to communicate effectively. And without these skills, can we really sustain the media, or can we further the media culture?
I think, with the current trends, the technology and trends like social media and the discourse that's taking place, it's now I think we are going to be soon talking about broad communication in a broader sense than specifically news media. Because, like you're saying, everyone has access. Everyone takes part in these discussions. And people need to mature and get used to it. So I think that is going to have to happen in terms of, recently I took part in a panel discussion on communications. The topic was Eastern religion and philosophies and communications. So I Googled a little bit, I talked to some of our Kempos and all that. Then I was directed to a site, like Buddha's teachings, and this you know more than me, the 60 qualities of speech. If I'd read the Buddha's teaching on mindful communication, if I'd read that, I wouldn't have gone to college or degree or master's degree, because it's there. The mindful communication is explained, mindful clarity in what you say, mindful listening, mindful silence. That's why one of the great communicators, Eleanor Roosevelt, was famous because she used to listen so hard, she used to perspire. She used to sweat listening to someone that much. That kind of, which we Bhutanese are not very good at doing, I think. We are better at talking than listening. But not just Bhutanese, I think many people.
But I think we do talk about these things as Buddhists. The other day I was looking at the list of 3 C's attributed to Socrates, of how you tell the truth, tell what is good and what is useful, what's necessary. And that directly links to what the Buddha has taught about the 4 negative speech that you avoid. Telling what is wrong, what is false, harsh words and slander, and idle gossip. When we reflect on these things, in the Asian age, you have people like Socrates in the West who make it a moral responsibility for everyone to tell the truth. And the same also was claimed by the Buddha in our part of the world, that it is our moral responsibility to tell the truth. But we now live in the era of post-truth, of alternative facts. For 2,500 years we have been informed and inspired and guided by allegiance to truth, and suddenly we find a new 21st century with a different ideology or different ethos. How is that going to be a problem for us? Or live a problem? How are we going to cope with this post-truth era that we brought up?
I think what I don't hear what you're saying as a question. The doctor was more of a teaching. Yes, but how do we this mindful, what's happening is, and that's why you have concepts like GNH and all this, they're saying, okay, the human society is driven by GDP, greed and consumerism, and that media, obviously, being a strong element there. Media don't, they see the audience not as people, more as consumers. And that's what's happening, and consumerism being driven. That's why there's this move, pun on GNP is GNH. I think that we must go beyond this materialistic, beyond greed. And I think that is a debate that really needs to be taken up in more depth here. I think it's a beautiful concept, it hasn't been developed.
So let me ask a deeper, more spiritual, philosophical question then. I'm a practicing Buddhist, and as a Buddhist, the purpose of my life is set on liberation, freedom, nirvana, enlightenment, whatever you call it. So my pursuit of freedom becomes a fundamental component of my purpose of life, of the meaning of my life. Let's use this analogy to think about media, of freedom of expression and freedom of hearing, or right to information, if you put it in a legal term. Is our yearning for freedom of expression and right to information a fundamental component of our being, something that we see innately as a fundamental trait of the person? Or is it a secondary luxury that we can have after meeting all the basic needs of food and shelter? Can we, in other words, suspend the need for freedom of expression in the interest of a higher goal, such as national security or sovereignty? What's your take on that?
That's what I meant when you say that freedom of expression must be or should be a basic human right. I think there's also the other argument, that freedom has to come with responsibility. Freedom of expression doesn't mean just saying what you want to say. That you have to have the responsibility, and then again that whole existential debate on the rights of the individual versus interests of the community. That you don't do, it's that community interest, especially in a small vulnerable society, is important. Remember when in 2007, because 2008 was the election, one policeman stopped a taxi driver for misdriving. I don't know what he did. He did something wrong. And the taxi driver said, "You wait till democracy comes." meaning then I'll do whatever I want. So there is this that morality, but there's the consciousness of the greater interest. Like that Indian lady who came here, who spoke at the Mountain Echoes Festival, and said, "No freedom here." She said, if someone in Delhi tells me how to build my house, I'll tell them to go to hell. Then we have to talk about what behind it, the philosophy behind our regulations on architecture, on culture, on dress, on language, that it really boils down to survival. And that, yes, that individual interest is important, but not at the cost of harming society, for example.
So in the process of development, in the process of critical discourse, we have to assume the responsibility of being part of a greater majority. And on that note, I will open it to the greater majority to pose their questions. And I'll come back to you with my last question. Sure.
There's no question we can have a tea coffee. before the doctor gets too active here. So while they're thinking of me, can I add something while everyone's thinking of a question? We were talking about in terms of largely media, but I think we're talking about media, the media that exists, that are functioning in a changing society, right? And the media what is the role of the media? And this is something which is really very important for me. I think role of media, including social media, is really the shared consciousness. Right? As a society, as a community, we have to have this shared consciousness which leads to shared values, which leads to identity. And it's media that does that, like people from Saptan, Samsi, Ha, Gasa, perhaps, when they are listening to the same radio programs, reading the same newspapers, watching the same television, somehow, you have that shared consciousness. It doesn't mean that everyone must think alike, but everyone has to share those values. Because I think a lot of our young people are now sharing values, promoted by Hollywood and Bollywood and K-pop and everything else.
Yes. Please, answer.
Thank you so much, Dasho. Thank you so much, Doctor. I have a question which has to do with freedom of expression. And I understand, of course, your definition, and I think that freedom of expression should take into consideration the good of the community and the larger benefit of the people, and not your own personal view. But if I understand properly, but where, in this case, where does self-censorship come? Because if we censor ourselves for the good of the community, how do you reconcile this two expression? For example, I give a very recent example about Doklam. Okay, in Bhutan there was a big silence on Doklam. I was called many times. I was in France, and I say I have nothing to say. This is self-censorship in the interest of the country. So there is something here I don't really understand.
I think when you go into issues like self-censorship, right, it gets quite complex. I think this is where the citizen journalism idea doesn't work. This is where people do need to be trained to understand situations. But even senior citizens, mature citizens do understand all that, I think. But there isn't, when it comes to self-censorship, I think it's a difficult area. I think this is where sometimes you have to feel your way. I mean, and sometimes, I think that's what I was doing very often. I was feeling my way, navigating my way through as a writer, as an editor, trying to be a journalist. Often, I really even hesitated to call myself a journalist because I had to compromise and go into censorship to an extent. But and the pressures are very intricate, very interesting. For example, the one news item which Kinsale carried when I was editor, about a particular family, upset that family, and that family, when they had the birthday party for their 5-year-old son, they didn't invite my 5-year-old son, who was his best friend, and even asked why. So these things are not easy to deal with. I think it's not just being threatened and not being worried about. In some countries, of course, journalists get killed, journalists get jailed, many things happen. But I think this is something, skillful means, we have to ultimately come down to skillful means to convey your message.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. You mentioned at the beginning, Dasho, that journalism is a calling. Given all of the challenges and complications journalism and the media face now, some of which we just talked about today, what advice would you give to young Bhutanese students thinking about pursuing that calling in their future?
Recently, last year, we had a journalist media dialogue in Paro, a group of journalists organized by, that was one of the BCMD programs, and they invited Khenpo Phimsatashi, one Buddhist Khenpo, to come and talk to these journalists. So one of the first questions he asked was, why have you become journalists? Are you getting well paid? Are you looking for fame, glamour? And there was nobody who could answer in that group. So they hadn't thought about why they became a journalist. They went for a job. Okay. And that often happens here, we know. You want a job, we used to be manpower department before, now RCSE, they say, okay, here's a vacancy in finance, go become an accountant, or go become a doctor, or whatever, depending on vacancies, depending on jobs that are available. So I think now, with ICT, with this, to use a cliche, with imagination being the only limit, you have the tools to do whatever you want. You should have that same responsibility to know what you're doing. What is journalism? And I think it's, you can read about journalism, you can learn these things, but it will be wrong if you're going to join a newspaper, radio station, whatever, purely for the salary. A lot of glamour comes in, because television, for example, is a very glamorous medium.
Thank you, Dr. Sure. I
think you're also allowed to ask Doctor a question.
Dasho, I was just wondering about the disconnect between social media and freedom. So on a lot of social media websites, you do have kind of like a trolling of information by certain websites, so they're constantly monitoring what kind of behavior, where you're going, what kind of behavior you're demonstrating online, and also anticipating what your next move is going to be. So, for instance, Facebook monitors everything you do. And if you go online to buy something, there's all kinds of algorithms. They're always calculating what you're going to do next. And then there's a developing form of sociology, which is online social behavior. And they're constantly monitoring what you're going to do. So when we talk about freedom and social media, is it really free, or is it within a capitalistic mode? And a lot of the times, it's how to make money and profit. So I'm just wondering if you could give us your thoughts on that.
I think when we look at guides to social media issued by including the Bhutan guideline to social media, one of the first warnings, and especially for young people, is that the moment you log in, right, you're not on your own. You're being watched. You know, at one stage, people were worried about criminals, cyber criminals. Who are predatory, looking out for young victims. But now it's all the corporations, all the business, all the advertisers, everything they suck in, and they have amazing technology to analyze what you want, what you're likely to buy, and what kind of food or clothing you're likely to, wear. So you're definitely not on your own, and I think that's one of the first things. I think some young Bhutanese are also finding out the hard way, because social media means you go to a bar with friends. What do you do? Cheers, your beer, your whiskey, having a few drinks. For 2-3 years later, you're going for a job, and the first thing they do is they check you out on social media or your online behavior, and there they say, okay, this guy's an alcoholic. That kind of so that sense of awareness which you need. So that's again, this is something which we need to know. My worry would be technology is changing so fast. We don't have time to keep up. It's like, as they say, the nail deciding what the hammer should do.
Yeah, on this front, with this issue of social media and online social behavior, unless we have benevolent states sponsoring and setting up the whole IT mechanism, we are bound to serve the interests of some corporate groups. And since we don't have the option of having benevolent states to do it, I think our only option now is to deal with the corporates, to challenge the corporates to be socially responsible, to not do unethical, socially irresponsible things. So there has to be much more consumer education to address this issue of which, for instance, Facebook or Google is more socially responsible and who we should subscribe to. So it probably comes down to educating the consumers and clients of these various services and trying to push, lobby the corporates to be more ethical.
Good afternoon. I'm very interested to hear Dasho's and Doctor's view on how we can use media to achieve the SDG Goal 5, that's gender equality in the context of Bhutan. I personally am very worried about the recent trend of advertisements that we see on our national television, and also some of the dialogues in our Bhutanese films reinforcing existing gender stereotypes. So I'm interested in hearing both your views on this.
This is not just Bhutan, right? This is a global debate and studies going on and all that. But yes, I think it's a concern. Perhaps better understood here than many other societies. Although we do have our problems. I remember when we on one of the royal tours, when His Majesty Fort King was trying to encourage people, girls, saying now you don't need taxi and tari and all these tools. Now it's computer, so physical strength doesn't matter. You can do well in life. You can build your careers. And then he said, for example, and then he's looking around, and everyone was trying to think of examples, and there were not many examples at that stage. So these experiences, but now we also hear very strongly. I hear, quite a few, if not women, the feminist voices, and complaints, suggestions, organizations coming up. So I think it's again awareness, isn't it? One of the basic facts, I think men and women are different, but a question of dealing with their social status and roles in society, I think that's something which I agree, which we really need to be conscious about.
I again fully sympathize with the issue of gender stereotyping that we see in media, with mainstream and social media. And I think this is down to, as Dasho pointed out, our superficial understanding of issues, our very shallow approach to life. We have a lot of unthinking people, obviously going with the very habitual patterns. And there is a very deeply embedded habitual patterns to have the gender cliches. But then there are some media houses here that I applaud for the work they've done, perhaps unwittingly. BBS radio is one. I often tune in to listen to BBS radio, especially the program to play songs or sing on their phones. And this seemed to build the capacity and the confidence of lots and lots of remote girls. Almost all of the people who sing on their channels, at least the majority, are girls from their fields or girls who are herding their cows. So I often tune in because I feel encouraged that there is one media channel that is indirectly empowering these women to come out and sing a song or share a joke, tell a story. So I think there are ways we can use media to overcome the gender inequality.
Even the discussions, I think, just as we do focus on problems, we should also look at some of the positive side of things. The one, if I may very quickly share one story, one woman doctor, Indian doctor, a very close friend of mine, she said she was working here for a few years, she worked here, and then one of her friends, a sister, Bhutanese sister, lost her husband. So she was, of course, she very sympathized and she was really sorry for her, she felt bad for her. But she said after a few months, the sister came back to work and she seemed okay. So she said, oh, maybe that relationship wasn't that deep. Then afterwards, it happened again. Another woman friend of hers lost her husband, and she said she noticed she came back, and actually after 3 months or so, this woman, she even saw her smiling. So she said, oh, her conclusion was Bhutanese women are perhaps a little superficial, because losing a husband kind of relationship, and being able to just smile after a few months. Then before she left, she said after 3 years when she was leaving, she realized that the problem was herself. She came from a society where if you lose your husband, you're finished. You don't go back to work, you're really ostracized, you have no life ahead. Whereas here, the women do seem to have to be able to continue.
Last, thank you. I'd like to ask a question in line with the media in Bhutan being in its infancy still. And I'd also like to link my question to the social media. As a citizen, I feel very concerned looking at the development of, I don't know whether to call it journalism or media in the country. I think even Dr. Karmafinso also did raise that after so many years of the media being in place, would it still qualify to be in its infancy? This is one question. And in the other hand, I think the social media today is way, I think, over, capturing the Bhutanese audience rather than the mainstream journalism or media. Today, if you walk around town, people don't talk of what the BBS was reporting or what the Pinsel has reported. It's all about social media or on Facebook, WhatsApp, all these things. So as a concerned citizen, understanding that social media is not, I think, regulated adequately because it's individual, the freedom of expression. In line with that, are the Bhutanese not going to be influenced more by this sort of free-flowing media rather than the regulated, factual reporting that could be provided with professional journalism? So my question is to Dr. Dasho, Dasho, and this is having, I think I don't see anybody more qualified than you to perhaps throw some light on the question that I'm going to ask. It is having had so many experience, so many years of experience in the field of journalism, and also having served in that position as Secretary of Information and Communications Ministry. What, in your opinion, are some of the things that are very essential to take the mainstream Bhutanese media
and let them mature. No more infanzilla. I think we need professional reporting, we need professional journalism. So I'd like to hear from you on this. Thank you.
So this infancy is not a very popular word. Yes, so in terms of social media and professionalism in media, you're talking about these two issues basically. When it comes to, social media is not that thing out there. Actually, social media is actually us. We were once at a closed door senior government meeting. One of the other secretaries actually questioned me. That secretary had been attacked, so they said, okay, what is information ministry doing about social media? This social media, this thing that has come and is destroying all of us. So my really only answer was that it's not social media, it's us. Before social media came, what were we saying about each other? Were we saying nice things about each other? In terms of the gossip, rumor. So we suddenly have this tool and a large audience. So we haven't changed ourselves. We just have a more useful tool with much bigger reach. That's why this is a gossip charged machine. So in that sense, yes, that we really need to look at ourselves, think of ourselves, and that's why we do need to discuss and look at the guidelines. When it comes to the mainstream media or journalists, okay, it's really training and exposure. That's not happening. That's not happening here. Even our government budget and then all the leadership like MPs, politicians need to know now that the government has to invest, okay, because it's a developing society. Bhutanese government has invested in many areas and then let it develop. For example, our government gave 3 million Nutrum, I think, or 5 million to the media, news media and entertainment media. The commercial media, the media awards, film awards, get huge subsidy from government, but not training of journalists, which is much more important. That's why we're saying that media professionalism is about professionals, not about funding and all that. And this is what we need to work on, as a society. Because democracy means the social media gives people, the tool also to keep the decision makers accountable. And this is what some of the things we need to do. So we are now talking about the need for bloggers, responsible professional bloggers and writers and other forms of media. The commercial media film does well. Documentary films don't do well because it's too expensive to make. And they're the films that we need, and this is where state support needs to be directed. But politicians will get more votes from the commercial media. The big stars, and look at Bollywood stars come here, we all get excited. And so this is the change in thinking we need right from the leadership level to, I think, all of us.
I'm pretty sure the media houses will be happy to hear that there has to be more state support to them. There is a question from upstairs from the students. You mentioned freedom of expression comes with responsibility. Can you expand on that and explain how that is applicable to life in Bhutan?
Wow. I think what we are saying is, some people think freedom of expression means you can say anything you want. But what we are saying is you have to be mindful when you exercise that freedom. You have to be mindful of the other people, of the impact you might have on others. And this is something, not just Bhutan, I think it's anywhere. There's, for example, hate speech. I would say, like hate speech, even we see quite a bit of hate speech among these in the social media. I think that should be criminalized. People need to be pulled up, because you have, and not, you can't say, okay, I just meant it for the heck of it. No, millions of people are writing what you read, what you write, reading what you write. You have to take responsibility for that. So the regulations have to be there. I mean, cybercrime can lead to deaths and suicides and all that. So I think we need to have this cyber security consciousness and talk about morality and ethics and values and all that. I think we need to be aware of all that. not easy, as most societies have found out, but it's better it works better, I think, in mature societies, like the Scandinavian countries seem to have less problems with this, because the people their thinking has matured to an extent. I'm talking maturity as opposed to infancy.
So, can I take the last question?
Dasho, I would like to reflect on the journey of print media, especially after its privatization 10 years, a decade ago. I think we made a fantastic start that time. We had this different versions of print media focusing on issue-based and niche audiences and market. For example, we could have this Bhutan Observer covering rural issues better and in more in-depth than Quincell. And we had this Bhutan Times covering very good investigative journalism, so on and so forth, like Business Bhutan. But after a few years, all media started running the same story, so you could just go and buy just one paper. That's what went wrong. I think we lost that niche market and niche audiences by those specific print media houses. I was wondering what actually went wrong.
I think it's the interpretation of freedom of expression, saying that anyone now can start a newspaper, and we're talking about print media here. And then Bhutanese have this habit. You think once you start something, the government is responsible to make sure it survives. So that competition wasn't there, and government did not create that competition, because we need to have newspapers. Say the government, our guidelines said, let's have minimum 3 newspapers. If you have 2, you just have one for each party. But let's have 3 newspapers, and the government must put all the advertising in these 3, based on these rules and regulation and this criteria. And that didn't happen because the private media themselves, I noted because I was involved to a great extent, wouldn't accept that. And therefore went to the leadership, to the politicians, saying, no, we have to give. So our government had some silly rules at one stage. Let's give it turn by turn. Ads turn by turn. So we have this example in the East that week. They said Kinsell's had his turn now with this newspaper. The ads went there, and those ads were those political candidates campaigning in the East. This newspaper didn't sell in the East. So both the people and the politicians are robbed, and they're cheated in that sense. Because this newspaper just distributed around here. So this kind of real professional thinking. And to be honest, I thought I knew what needs to be done. Not so easy.
So to conclude now the mindful conversation with Dasho, last question. Bhutan Dialogues is offering 2 books from the New York Times bestseller list as a token of appreciation. Which 2 books did you choose and why?
Well, one is the Plato and Platypus Walk into a Bar. It's a book of jokes, but it's some nice dirty jokes, but it's learning philosophy through jokes. Jokes that are based on philosophical thinking and all that. It's a very educative, very fun book. That's one. And one is this Crazy Wisdom Saves the World Again, by a American Zen practitioner. Something, crazy wisdom is something close to, I think, our hearts as Vajrayana Buddhists.
The books do go very well with your humor, your sense of humor, and also your personality, Dasho. On this note, I want to thank you for joining me in this civil conversation. I would like to end with a popular Buddhist proverb. Civility is a mark of learning. Purity of thought is a mark of meditation. Tetak shishin duwa, kontak nyonam neba. This series of civil conversations that we have, we hope will be able to cultivate this culture of civil discourse and create a space for critical thinking, so that our discussions and discourses can better inform the decisions, the policies, the programs we make. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Dasho, for joining us. And do send us your feedback to bhutan.dialogues@gmail.com. Thank you very much.